Have you ever heard the saying, God may forgive, but the internet never does? It might as well have been written for these gospel legends, once praised as voices of heaven, now remembered for sins too dark to ignore. They weren't just choir leaders or pulpit preachers, they were icons who made congregations weep with joy. But behind closed doors, some committed acts that left scars deeper than any sermon could heal. One brutally beat a child into disability. Another twisted Holy Scripture just to hustle his flock into buying him a luxury car. And some used their sacred positions for selfish, even sinful pleasures. These aren't rumors. These are the chilling truths behind 19 gospel greats who fell from grace and left a trail of betrayal in their wake. Stick around, because the names we're about to reveal might just shatter everything you thought you knew. James Cleveland, the gospel legend and the locked room in Brooklyn. You've heard his voice at weddings, at funerals, echoing through Sunday mornings like a prayer from heaven. James Cleveland wasn't just a gospel singer, he was gospel. When he sang, "Peace be still," entire churches would fall silent. His voice was called a blessing, a gift from God. But behind that voice was a secret that shattered lives. On the night of February 8, 1986, at Cornerstone Church in Brooklyn, Cleveland performed live on television. The crowd roared. The choir erupted in applause. A teenage boy in a crisp white shirt stood near the orchestra, introduced as Cleveland's young protege. He had followed the choir for just 3 months. What the audience didn't know was that Cleveland had already booked a private hotel room, room 304 at a nearby Marriott, 2 days in advance. No guests, no staff, no witnesses. By 6 a.m. the next morning, housekeeping reported seeing that same teenage boy stumble out of room 304. His coat was pulled tightly around him. He walked with visible pain, clutching a thick envelope. Inside, $300 in cash, and a handwritten note that read, "Don't tell anyone. God understands everything." This wasn't the first time. Exactly 5 years later, on February 9, 1991, James Cleveland died of AIDS-related complications. At his funeral, he was celebrated as the spiritual father of American gospel. But for some, he was something else entirely. In those locked rooms, far from the spotlight and the choirs, James Cleveland wasn't a man of God. He became the face of faith, used as a weapon. A voice once praised as divine became, for many, a haunting echo of betrayal. Al Green, when the gospel turned dark. Al Green was once seen as the embodiment of redemption, a soul singer who rose from the temptations of fame to embrace the pulpit, trading velvet suits for a pastor's robe and stage lights for stained glass. To many, he was living proof that salvation was real. That even a man of passion and excess could find his way back to God. But on a sweltering night in August 1978, inside a modest Memphis home, that illusion shattered. That evening, police received a frantic, broken call from Shirley, Al Green's first wife. Her voice trembled as she alleged he had thrown a guitar at her in a fit of rage, then used the strap to hold her down. Hospital records would later confirm a fractured shoulder and bruises around her neck, injuries detailed in the divorce papers that followed. Green never denied the abuse. But rather than offer a public apology or face legal consequences, he returned to his pulpit the next Sunday, preaching forgiveness as if nothing had ever happened. Then came something even more disturbing. Not long after the divorce, a former girlfriend arrived at his home one autumn night. The visit turned violent. In the heat of an argument, she poured scalding oatmeal across his back, sending him to the hospital with second-degree burns. But that was only the beginning. That same night, while he lay in recovery, she locked herself in his bathroom and took her own life with a gunshot. Police found her body in the bathtub, the water gone cold. The press erupted. The same house once known as the dwelling of a preacher became infamous. The sanctuary of darkness, they called it. Whispers grew louder. How could a man who sang about heaven live in such hell? Even as he racked up Grammy Awards and earned praise from presidents for his gospel music, his personal life remained scarred by violence, trauma, and silence. And so the question lingered, how can a voice that sings of salvation be trusted, when the hands behind it once struck his wife? The white robe he wore on Sunday mornings may have symbolized grace, but beneath it was a past soaked in old blood. A past that no sermon, no song, and no amount of fame could ever truly cleanse. BB Winans, when a prayer becomes a curse behind closed doors. BB Winans, born in 1962, was once hailed as the golden voice of modern gospel, a beacon of faith from the legendary Winans family. Alongside his sister Cece, he sang of divine love and spiritual healing, moving congregations to tears with a voice that felt like it had been touched by heaven itself. To the world, he was the sound of salvation. But behind the pulpit-perfect smile and soul-stirring melodies was a man whose own house knew a very different tune. By the late 2000s, rumors began to crack the image. This wasn't the BB Winans fans thought they knew. Behind closed doors, he was said to be controlling, short-tempered, and loud, a preacher in public, but a storm in private. His ex-wife Deborah once described their home as a battlefield disguised as a blessing. What began as evening prayers often descended into shouting matches, fists pounding on walls, and their child hiding in fear beneath the kitchen table. Then came the morning of March 11, 2009. A custody argument at their Detroit home spiraled out of control. Deborah, shaken and shoved, collapsed to the floor. BB, stunned, stood silent, frozen in the wreckage of the moment. When police arrived, they found him sitting motionless, a Bible lying open on the coffee table, clutching his phone like it might deliver a divine pardon. Though no criminal charges were filed, the damage was irreversible. The headlines exploded. His concerts were cancelled. Gospel radio stations fell silent. Long-buried stories surfaced, of backstage outbursts, jealous rages, smashed car windows, and tearful prayers that reeked of alcohol just off stage. He had become the embodiment of gospel's darkest irony, a man who sang of grace, yet lived in shadows. Still, BB returned. As if the scandal had never happened, he released new albums, stood on stages, and spoke of redemption. But something had changed. Every note he sang now carried a haunting echo. To many in the audience, his voice, once the sound of salvation, became a reminder of a painful truth. Sometimes the most beautiful prayers are whispered by the most broken souls. Andraé Crouch, the gospel saint with cocaine in his Bible. Andraé Crouch wasn't just a gospel singer. He was the soul lifter of a generation, the man whose voice turned broken prayers into anthems of hope. From Soon and Very Soon to Take Me Back, his music baptized millions in faith, healing hearts with every note. But behind the pulpit robe and the heavenly melodies was a secret no hymn could hide. One night, police tapped on the window of his Cadillac. Calm as a preacher leaving revival, Crouch stepped out. But the peace shattered when officers opened his glove compartment and pulled out a small bag of cocaine, tucked between sermon notes and gospel tapes. He didn't run. He didn't plead. With a faint smile, he shrugged and said it probably belonged to a friend. But the faithful knew better. That excuse was thinner than the Bible pages he clutched on Sundays. From that moment on, the music changed. To some, his songs no longer felt like calls to worship, but confessions in disguise. Behind those locked studio doors, during those sleepless nights with bloodshot eyes, was he touched by the Spirit, or numbed by something darker? He was never convicted. His name stayed etched in gospel history. But the whispers never stopped. When he died in 2015, the church overflowed with songs and tears, but in the corners, some stood quiet, asking the questions no one dared speak aloud. How many of those hallelujahs were cries for help? How many of those heavenly verses were written in the shadows of addiction? Because sometimes, even the angel guiding others to the light is the one most lost in the dark, alone in a midnight Cadillac, carrying cocaine in the same Bible that once saved souls. Phil Driscoll, When the Trumpet Sounded Straight into Hell. It's almost impossible to believe that Phil Driscoll, the golden-haired trumpeter who once lit up America's biggest church stages and won a Grammy for turning gospel into glory, was living a double life that led straight to disgrace. In the 1970s, when Phil raised his trumpet, it didn't just echo through the pews, it felt like heaven itself was listening. But behind the soaring notes and the polished sermons was a man trafficking in darkness. By day, he played to the faithful. By night, he was smuggling heroin, forging fake bills, and slipping unscanned cargo through airport security. His fall came crashing down on a cold February night in 1978, when police raided his home in Oklahoma. There was no running, no hiding, just 2 packets of white powder on the table, a Bible open to Psalms, and his silver trumpet gleaming under harsh police lights, like it had just watched its master fall from grace. The community was stunned. The church where he once stirred souls shut its doors for 3 weeks. No one could pray. No one dared to believe. But Phil's sins didn't stop there. Almost 3 decades later, in September 2006, he found himself in court again, this time for a bold, years-long tax fraud scheme. The 2007 trial didn't draw crowds, but it delivered a final, fatal blow to his image as a warrior of faith. When he finally returned to the stage, people still showed up. They still clapped. But the cheers were hollow, no longer for inspiration, but for a man whose trumpet once pointed to heaven and somehow led him into hell. His music, once divine, now echoed with one haunting truth: even angels can fall. James Fortune, the healing voice that became a family's nightmare. James Fortune once stood as a beacon of hope in urban gospel. With his hit song, I Believe, he became the soothing voice in the storm, his prayers wrapped in melody, comforting souls through heartbreak and struggle. Listeners wept as he sang. They trusted him. They believed in his message of healing. But behind the pulpit and polished studio vocals lay a truth too dark to be silenced by even the most powerful prayer. On a quiet evening in a Houston suburb, September 12, 2003, his wife rushed into the ER, carrying her 4-year-old son. The boy's small body was covered in bruises. Deep injuries marked his back and torso. When the doctors asked what happened, she hesitated, eyes filled with fear, before quietly revealing the unthinkable. James had overreacted when the boy broke something. He claimed it was discipline. Authorities disagreed. The injuries were far beyond that. He was arrested. A civil suit followed, though quietly settled out of court. But the image of that wounded child, lying in a hospital bed, haunted the public. The stain on Fortune's name had begun. Then, years later, July 23, 2014, another call from Houston. This time, a hotel. Police arrived to find a woman, his wife again, shaking in the hallway, her clothes wrinkled, her voice trembling. Hours earlier, an argument over finances had exploded. In her words, James became enraged and grabbed her violently. Though her physical injuries were minor, the emotional scars ran deeper. He was taken into custody once more, and the gospel world shuddered. For a man who built his career on songs about redemption, these revelations felt like betrayal. The community listened differently now. Every note he sang, every lyric about grace, rang hollow to some. The same voice that once lifted people from despair now carried a shadow. Yes, James Fortune still stood on stage. He still sang. But under the warm glow of church lights, the audience could not forget. Not the broken child. Not the trembling wife in the hotel corridor. His music might still echo in sanctuaries, but the trust, the faith in the man behind the mic, had long since been shattered. Donnie McClurkin, from healing voice to controversial figure. Donnie McClurkin was once hailed as a voice of hope, a man who sang of pain, redemption, and rising from the ashes. His gospel anthem, Stand, moved congregations to tears, a testimony of survival that seemed to embrace the broken and uplift the forgotten. But behind the pulpit and platinum records, a deeper story was unfolding, one that would fracture the very community that once found solace in his songs. In 2002, McClurkin publicly opened up about his past struggles with same-sex attraction, tracing it back to abuse he suffered as a child. For many LGBTQ individuals raised in faith-based communities, his honesty felt revolutionary. Here was a celebrated gospel star acknowledging their pain, someone who understood. But that fragile bond would soon be shattered. By 2010, McClurkin's tone had dramatically shifted. Standing before thousands at a Christian rally in Texas, he declared that homosexuality was a mistake, one that faith could fix. To the very people who had once seen him as a light in the darkness, his words cut like a blade. He wasn't just denying his own past, he was condemning theirs. The reaction was swift and visceral. Support turned to sorrow, and sorrow to outrage. Not because Donnie had once wrestled with his identity, but because he chose to disown and denounce those who saw their story in his. Overnight, McClurkin transformed from a symbol of healing to a lightning rod of controversy. He continued to sing. He continued to preach. But for many, the man who once stood tall in brokenness was now seen as someone who turned his back on the very people he once inspired. A hero to some, a traitor to others, a legacy forever caught between deliverance and denial. Michael English. Michael English, the anointed voice that fell from grace. To many, Michael English was the voice of purity, an angelic tenor with soft, pleading eyes who didn't just sing about grace, he made you feel it. At massive Christian festivals, his music felt like a personal prayer, a healing balm for broken souls. He wasn't just a gospel star, he was a vessel of hope. But all of that shattered in a single heart-wrenching moment in August 1994. After a summer music festival near Nashville, Michael told his team he was staying behind to pray. But as the night wore on, a hotel staff member witnessed him slipping into a room at midnight, not alone, but with a married woman who fronted a rival gospel group. By morning, they emerged disheveled, fingers entwined, as stunned photographers captured the fall of a man who once stood above reproach. The headlines were brutal. Churches turned their backs. Gospel stations blacklisted his songs. Tour invitations disappeared overnight.